Hi guys, welcome to episode 13 of Synchromistic. I'm here with my good friend Wayne McCroy with some more occult metadata for you to understand what is going on here. There's a whole world of this metadata out there. And I've been looking into this week, I've been getting more into the transhumanism stuff after living in Habad land for many, many months. It's nice to sort of look at something else. And I found this Selfish Ledger, hard to say, Selfish Ledger by Google that came out in 2016. It's a while back. Nick Foster, I believe, was the guy behind it. And this was a thought process or thought experiment. But the video was supposedly leaked. I don't believe it was leaked. It's put out there to, get the public used to it. But this whole system was basically a way of storing everything you ever do in a system. They have a whole kind of backup of everything you've ever done. But then I came across, well, okay, well, what were they going to do with that? Why would they need that to last forever? Everything you're ever going to do. They say, oh, because we can get your preferences and build you 3D models and stuff like that. No, I believe that it's probably going to be combined with what we're going to be talking about mostly today is the fact that they can now write data to the DNA strand. So, could they create a minority report ledger of everything you've done, everything your parents have done, your great great grandfather's done, and create a system of categorizing bloodlines, family lineage, the naughty families of the world that we want to stamp out? That's my theory. I think it's probably it's a good one. Let's get into it with Wayne. How are you doing, Wayne?
Doing fantastic, Richard. Always good to hear from you, my friend. So, this is an interesting bit of information we're looking at here. And this kind of crosses the bounds between what you might call the conspiratorial and what would largely be accepted by the mainstream as scientific fact. And that's where we're actually skating between the lines here with this stuff because all of this is well documented. We have a whole science associated with this. And currently it's called epigenetics. So the very things you're talking about already do exist and have kind of been proof of concept given for this throughout the course of time already. So we see this, but a lot of this is based upon a theory that runs a little different than what the accepted mainstream theory is as far as genetics, epigenetics, and evolutionary traits in mankind go and the biological standards that are held up with that. And this is something called molecular Lamarckianism. And this is something I looked at heavily about 10 to 12 years ago when I was doing a lot of research into my book I was writing at that time on the autism epidemic. So this is something that I found really interesting because we have some of these dynamics in play with this. And it has to do with the structure of DNA and hidden information within the DNA of biological creatures. So we have what they call junk DNA. This is what the term they came up with to describe all of this extra genetic information that human beings have that they have no idea what it's there for or what it does. So they call it junk DNA. They don't see it as being something important, but this is actually where a lot of different information or data can be stored and has been stored through the course of time. And this is why we have things like epigenetic memories from our ancestors. And this has been validated through a lot of different scientific papers and stuff out there in the mainstream. You can actually inherit the trauma of your ancestors as well as some other things. So, like, I read one study where it's talking about if your grandfather had a healthy diet, that affects your health later on down the line in the genetic epidemiology of things. So, they have actually put this down in a lot of scientific peer-reviewed journals, the study of epigenetics, and it's become its own science within the course of the past 15 years or so. And now we're beginning to understand more about this, that there's actually more that can be stored in the DNA than just genetic expression factors. And a lot of what is stored in DNA, according to this neo Lamarckian theory, is potentially kind of like a silenced genetic expression in people that can be reactivated by environmental factors. And this is where it differs from neo Darwinianism, as is handed down in popular science right now. This is the accepted model in most cases, but they understand it has its limitations. So, Darwinianism argues that a lot of the stuff that comes about as a positive trait that develops over the course of time within a species or a creature is due to some type of mutation. Well, when you observe mutation in reality in the modern world, you find the vast majority of the time, mutations, especially in the human being, are generally considered something negative, and they don't carry over because of our body's remarkable healing capacities that it has, its mechanisms of healing. So many of these genetic mutation traits don't carry forward to the next generation. And this kind of defies what we see expressed with the mainstream Darwinian notions of things. So, this Lamarckianism idea, which predates Darwinism, by the way, was largely leveraged on in the study of genetics and epigenetic sciences now. So, we have this notion that within your DNA, there is information stored that can be activated by some environmental factor. And then a new expression of the genetics will come forward, and we will have this trait passed down from generation to generation. This is what neo Lamarckianism dictates. So, this says things like education and things like that may have a a direct effect on future generations' IQ scores and intelligences. And they've done actual studies and papers talking about this. Whereas if you have this education, that's one environmental factor that may contribute to the awakening of the human mind in many regards and adding to the intelligence generationally downstream. So this is one of the arguments that they've made and they've established in the scientific literature. So, that being the case, what does this mean? This means there's hidden information in your DNA that doesn't actually express until given some environmental trigger. Now, understanding that and using the tools that they have today, well, they could certainly store information in DNA and maybe, I don't know, maybe give people some type of a vaccine or a gene therapy using tools like CRISPR-Cas9 as proof of concept, mRNA technologies. Maybe they can store hidden information in your genetic structure, and later on that will express when given the proper trigger. So this is all supposedly theoretical, but they have the capacity to actually do this. They have the technologies now. And if you look at some recent studies and things that have been put forward, they've been talking a lot about using DNA sequencing and stuff like that to actually store information, and that they could actually store an immense amount more information in DNA than they could in any standard capacity type of a electronic device that they might have to be able to store these. So they have a lot of ability there to do so. And what a lot of people miss the point on is when we're looking at this rollout of transhumanism and these cybernetics technologies, we're not talking strictly about electronic devices, computers, and things like that, and expressing things in that digital way. We're looking at biology along with that. And that's what people oftentimes overlook. They're tinkering with the biological aspects of things as well because they want to engineer in a certain direction everything in this world. They want to re-engineer it. And how do they do that? Well, they convince people that they need to take some type of a, I don't know, prophylactic treatment, if you want to call it that, to ward off some illness or some such thing. And then you're wired into the internet of bio-nano things and you don't realize it because they're not being forward with you on that. And what does that look like? Well, that looks like information hidden in your genome, which we'll express later when given the proper cue. And we'll get a little bit more into some of the more provable aspects of this as we go on here, Richard. But I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on this and how this actually ties into this notion of what they call the selfish ledger, which was put out by Google many years ago now.
Oh, it's absolutely fascinating, and it goes into blockchain, as you said, as you say, in an email we had together, and I want to get into that later as on. But so what we've got is two things going on here, guys. So you've got their understanding of the ability for information to be hidden in the genome and expressed later on, and what they've done is okay, if it can be taken out of the genome, we can hide things in it. So basically, logically, it's a safe. You can put something in it and you can take it out of it. If there's something in there, you can put more stuff in there. So they've understood that they can actually, and they are writing, they have written text and pictures and images to DNA. So scientists have already demonstrated that they can encode images and pages of text to DNA. However, an easy way to pick out the desired file from a mixture of many pieces of DNA will also be needed. Baith and his colleagues have now demonstrated one way to do that by encapsulating each data file with a 6 micrometer particle silica, which is labeled with short DNA sequences, labeled basically, that reveal the contents. So passcodes. So they, as you say, CRISPR-9 technology is able to retrieve this stuff. And then you have your messenger RNA, which is carrying it to the cell to change the cell, which is a courier, basically. As you think of it as your Amazon delivery person, it's taking the package, which is the information, to the cell. But they're changing it. They're putting a middleman in there with the mRNA there. So they're changing the route, or they're changing the delivery style and what they're actually taking. So they could have hidden. So this could go back thousands of years that they've hidden something in the human genome that they're trying to retrieve. They may know something we don't, but they also can hide something in there now. So when I was looking at the Google selfish ledger, I was saying, okay, they're creating all this database of information of what you've done, who you've hurt or accidentally hurt, or you likely to not go along with the seven Noahide laws, and what is your religious faith. They can categorize all that, take all that information, and then put that in your genome, and then you will pass that down to your children. So what they can do is say, okay, you've got this whole reparations thing now of you're paying the sins of thousands of hundreds years ago when you had nothing to do with any of this. But if you put that in a digital context, I'm not saying they're doing this, but if I can think of it, surely they can. They can say you're paying for the sins of your father, the original sin. You're paying for the original sin. You need a savior to come along to delete all that information from your bloodline, your lineage. You can't be trusted because your great great grandfather did this. And we know that because we retrieved that from your DNA that you were born with. You could see how this technology could be abused. They can do this stuff. They can do this stuff. Now, one thing that me and Wayne found out a few weeks back, Wayne brought up the Romulus and Remus um, wolf story and Rome, and we were talking about that. And it's fascinating how this stuff connects. And they were the two twins that were raised by a she wolf, and that goes into all sorts of areas which we covered a few episodes back. But the person that managed to do this was called George Church. Now, George Church runs a company. What was the company again called, Wayne? Forgot it again.
I also forgot. Let me Google it quick while you talk. We'll
Okay,
bring it up.
we'll have a look what the name of the company was because we both forgot it.
Oh,
Go on.
Colossal Biotechnologies.
Colossal Biotechnology. That this guy is one of the guys that have done this. So George Church and his not through this company, but with other things, Church and his team at Harvard are pioneering DNA data storage, a method that utilizes DNA's natural encodings to store vast amounts of information. Okay, so remember that. So he can do this. He's claiming anyway. Let's just go with it. He can. He's obviously done the whole Romulus and Remus thing and brought the direwolf back, or a version of the direwolf back, through his company. George Church was funded by Jeffrey Epstein. Now, what better place to store your compromat, files, and information than inside your body? Or if you were able to label, say with a blue butterfly or a monarch butterfly, or a lunar butterfly, which is the green one, the luminous one that are using a lot more layer. If you're able to label the human being, you could signify that that information exists within that person. They become a messenger of that information. What do you think of that kind of that's a theory, but the capabilities are there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it seems to me that maybe there's something plausible to a lot of what you're saying there. We've been hearing for a long time about this notion of the mark of the beast and all of these things. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road with a lot of it. Okay, maybe they can go ahead and store information in your genome in this way, but then comes the problem, how would they detect that? They would have to be looking for something, or they would have to have some type of, I don't know, technology present in the human body that would be able to read this information and perhaps give it some expression in some way and maybe transmit that information electronically or otherwise to some, I don't know, database somewhere. And it seems to me this is not beyond the realm of possibility. We've seen a lot of reports as to some of the things contained allegedly in some of these COVID vaccines that they've been using around the world. And we've seen the use of a lot of things like hydrogels and graphene and all of these things being reported with this and the different ideas associated with that. How you could pick up a Bluetooth signal from some of the vaccinated. I don't know if you've looked into that, Richard, but certainly it seems to me there might be something to that. And there's actual transmissions of information coming from within these people's bodies that have been vaccinated in this way now. Now, a lot of people will say that's all conspiracy theory. There's nothing to that. Put your tinfoil hat back on. You need to consider these things. It's worthy of examination and further scrutiny because there are some folks out there who have been able to detect Bluetooth signals coming from people that they can't otherwise express, internet connected networks that should not be there. And they have talked openly in white papers about the internet of bio-nano things and how the internet of the body and the internet of the mind, all of these things have been openly discussed. So it's the internet of bodies. Go ahead and look that up. That's an interesting thing in and of itself. So it's all about maybe tying this information together into some transmissible form of information packet that they could access remotely and maybe even activate remotely. Maybe they could activate gene expression remotely and go ahead and look at some of the technologies that they've been developing ostensibly to fight off things like cancer and stuff like this that they say about being able to do that remotely, activate some type of a nanotechnology in the human body to fight off cancer cells and things like that. And remember, all of these are dual use technologies. So they could use it for other things. And I found largely when I was initially looking into this science that's called molecular Lamarckianism that there's a notion within the human body when many of these recessive traits or gene expressions become active in people through some environmental trigger, this affects the methylation cycle in the human body and ties directly to the methylation cycle of the human body. And here's where it might blow your mind a little bit more. Methylation seems to be one of the factors that contributes very heavily to the autism epidemic. And there are, in fact, gene mutations that have been associated with autism called the MTHFR gene, mutations in that affect methylation. Now, what is methylation? Methylation is when your body is able to filter out things that don't belong in the body, heavy metals and other toxins such as that. So if your gene expression of methylation is affected in this way, you become more prone to being poisoned by these various toxins, heavy metals, and some such things. And a lot of this is associated with aluminum salts and things like that that tend to bioaccumulate in people. So this methylation factor is an interesting thing as well because methylation, this is the key to gene expression according to the neo-Lamarckian theory given here with this molecular Lamarckianism. So you find a lot of that present in people with autism. and they try to claim, well, this is a genetic trait. Well, actually, it's more of an epigenetic trait. And that's the whole point here, because what they've established in this Lamarckian idea is that whatever it is that your ancestors do, at least two generations back, can affect you in this way. So if your grandfather, say, was inundated with heavy metals and stuff like that, that will affect your health and may express in a genetic way, in this mutation of this gene. And this mutation of this gene may cause you to have problems with methylation. So, therefore, you're more susceptible to poisoning from heavy metal toxicity and things like that. And a lot of this becomes present in the autism epidemic that we see. And I've been able to connect the dots with this because actually, what happens is when you have this heavy metal toxicity, which affects your brain, not just your brain, but other tissues in your body as well. What happens is it literally rewires your brain. It blocks calcium neuronal channels and causes them to rewire themselves. And this expresses in repetitive behaviors and social awkwardness and things like that. So this becomes important in that regard. And you can see how, once again, it ties a lot of what's going on in the society today with this notion of them tinkering with our genome and trying to get us wired into the grid, so to say, with this. And of course, we'll see how this relates to that whole selfish ledger idea with Google and all of that, because it's all about creating an electronic record of all of this too and pairing the two together. That's what the communication networks, the bio-nano things, communication networks are about. It's pairing the human being with the electronic ledger. So I'd love to hear more of your thoughts here, Richard.
What's fascinating is when you said, as soon as you said, two generations back, straight away I thought the Jewish faith. You're considered Jewish, and we know that's a faith, not a race, but bear with me. In their system, um, if your mother's mother was Jewish, so it's two generations back on the mother's side, on the female side. That has to have something to do with this. The belief system imprinting in the epigenetics as well. I mean, they're trying to digitalize and in the material world make a system of this, systemize this, obviously, but they use principles that are much deeper and older than that. So the two generations back is really interesting because that's clearly an off take of that. And they thought, if it can go back two generations, your belief system, there's that's what you are. So there's obviously a connection there, in that system. So we're seeing all of these folding overs of beliefs and ways of behaving. But then you get someone like George Church comes in and he's working with Jeffrey Epstein. And you can tell there's so much more going on there. You've got Juliet Bryant, who I've spoken about quite a lot. Says she was a Epstein survivor. Her son is autistic. Um, my niece, sorry, my nephew is autistic, and I do believe, if I'm not wrong, that there's other people with autism in the side of the family from her husband's side. Um, I believe that Elon Musk has autism to a certain degree. I mean, I know they say we're all on the spectrum, but you know what? I think there's a common understanding of where on the spectrum there, and whether that's true, I don't know, but you can tell he has autistic traits. You can tell that. Greta Thunberg, autistic traits. They take advantage of these people, and as much as Elon Musk could be deemed evil, look what they've just done to him. He's obviously taken the bait. He's been in there with them. They've given him a black eye and sent him out the door, and he doesn't know what to do with himself. He's on drugs, but he clearly had autism. Clearly, from day one, I saw that someone who had autism. So yes, you can say he's evil and all doing all these things, but he's also a vulnerable person, and his parents are absolutely crooked. So they do you think they did breed this in to the certain person? Because I don't look at Elon Musk as a victim, but I suppose in a way he is a victim of this. That's kind of child abuse, and they know that he's got autism. They know that he was probably overly trusting with people. So to give it they clearly interested in people that have autistic traits and how useful they are to this system that they're trying to create, and it's quite clear. But the metal thing is really is it something that can be reversed? Do you think?
It's hard to say for sure because, like with anything else that goes with this, once the damage is done, it's really difficult to repair, especially when you're talking about a condition wherein these heavy metals may cross the blood-brain barrier and bioaccumulate in the brain and brainstem region and cause an encephalitis type reaction in people. And like I said, effectively what this does is it rewires the brain. Like it literally rewires the brain. So the damage is very difficult to reverse if it's even possible at all. Once it's done, it's done. So this is why it's important that we look at this stuff. And you'll find that it's interesting that you do have people like Elon Musk who claim to be on the spectrum. And I think there's a very much deeper agenda that goes with this that ties into the transhumanist agenda. And I've written two books on this now, Richard. The first one's called The Autism Epidemic, Transhumanism's Dirty Little Secret. And that's kind of an important read, I think, in the modern era. I think it's one of the most underrated books, and I'm not just saying that because I wrote it. That's been put out in recent years. There's definitely dots to be connected with this, and in my view, I think what's been established here and what they're trying to do is they're trying to engineer a condition that they call quote unquote autism without intellectual impairment, and they've been talking about this in certain white papers and think tank groups and places like that, especially relating to places that you and organizations and sciences you wouldn't expect it to show up in. So they talk about this stuff, and we have an entire rhetorical model of autism that's been engineered into society that's used as a social engineering trope to try to get people to accept autism and to normalize autism. And they've succeeded quite a bit in doing so because now you have all kinds of neurodivergence ideologies going on where people who obviously prior generations prior who wouldn't identify as autistic are now saying, well, I'm neurodivergent, and it's like, no, you're really not." But that's beside the point. But you have all of this mainstream push for this, and now even where was it somewhere in Saudi Arabia recently, Dubai. It was Dubai just recently. You could look this up. Within the past week, it's come out on social media and in the news that they're now an autism certified city, the first in the Middle East as being autism certified, so that they're friendly to people with autism, so that they're friendly to people who have those sensory issues and stuff like that. And I guess this is an important thing all of a sudden in the modern world because they've normalized autism. And let's face it, this is a condition which in my view has been engineered into humanity. And I might get a lot of flack from people for this. And I'm used to that flack for talking about this topic because it is touchy and it affects me personally. So I'm not uninformed in this topic for sure. So what they've done is they've normalized this autism epidemic. And what this is autism is actually what I identified in the second book I wrote about this as the post-human template. This is what they're trying to engineer in people. They're trying to engineer all of these positive aspects of the autism epidemic into people without the severe limitations or disabilities that come with it. And we see how a lot of this has to do with not only tinkering with the genome, but with getting people to come to a type of parity with the machine, essentially. So it's about digitizing human consciousness, trying to get people to be a cyborg of sorts by merging with the artificial intelligence, with the machine. It's about bringing human consciousness to parity with the computer. That's essentially what they want to do. Now, that's not to say that you're subhuman somehow if you are autistic or something like that. That's not the case. That's not the impression I'm trying to give people. What I'm saying is we've all been victimized in a lot of ways with the agendas that they've put forward, and they use people on the autism spectrum as guinea pigs for their new technologies and their new ideas. And I don't like it. They're taking advantage of these people and they're manipulating
Mm.
and using them in ways that they scarcely understand or know about. And a lot of people who are on the spectrum will say, "Well, I'm not a victim, and like I'm tired of people claiming that I'm somehow suboptimal or something like that." I'm not claiming that at all. What I'm saying is they've engineered this condition so that you are more compatible with the new world order that they want to put in place. Let's put it that way. I guess that's the most polite way I could say all of it. It certainly seems to be what they want to engineer in humanity. And you may not fall into all that criteria because I don't think they've quite figured it all out yet. And I don't think they've got a 100% lock on the direction that it's going. And it seems to me that they failed in many regards in trying to engineer this condition into people, but they're still trying. And a lot of it has to do with these digital ledger systems as well, and tying the human being, the biology of man, to the digital ledger. And that's where in this selfish ledger idea from Google comes from. And I'd love to hear more of what you're thinking here now, Richard.
Well, as you say, it's a personal kind of thing for you, obviously, as well. So you're not talking as that's something you know nothing about. You live this as well without going into your personal life. And I the same with my nephew who's autistic. And also we have a good friend of ours whose son's autistic as well, and it's obviously got a lot more prominent or prevalent even in the last 15 years, especially in males, which is interesting in of itself. Um, but as you say, I mean, I look at someone like Jared Kushner and I think there's a slight autism going there. It's almost like the detachment from understanding what other people are doing. I do look at people like even Baron Trump and think, is there an autism thing going on here? There's something different, almost distant, disconnected in a way. And again, we're not saying, we're not taking a judgment on that. We're literally just saying that this possibly has been, as you say, engineered. We've seen it got, but if you're passing this down the line, so let's take the technology we were speaking about. We know that they're able to put information into someone and literally information that you would store on your computer and pass it down. They can store it on DNA. We know that DNA transfers from one generation to the next. We understand that. We can see that in other traits of our of the way we all look like our parents in one way or another. We take certain bits. Um, so we know that works. We look at something like the Monarch project, and they understand that the monarch butterfly leaves its home, goes to somewhere else. They with thousands of them go there, and then somehow they die there. And I think I know two generations die there, and then they come back, and there's no way that that generation who come back should know the destination which grandparents come from, but they know epigenetically, so they understand. That's why it's called monarch butterflies. Where you see it on Prince Charles with his red painting on his shoulder. They understand that this information or this trauma as well passes down the line, so they understand they can use the human to store information. So if they're genetically trying to create a type of human, they understand that if they can get that right, if they can get what they want, and as mad as they are in the autistic spectrum to the level they want, they can see that pass down the bloodlines. So then you have this mirror vision bloodline. Then you have this kind of holy grail thing there. They've understood this stuff for a very long time. Now they've got the technology to mess around with it and do these things. What you said was fascinating, though. It seems to be like you said about you give it a term. Totally forgot what it was straight away. Um, about them wanting to kind of keep some traits but get rid of others. I forgot what you call it, but that was fascinating. What traits would they want to keep, and what others would they want? Would they want to keep the vulnerability and the trustworthiness and the obviously incredibly credible minds they have for learning and for pattern recognition and art and anything that's almost there is an algorithmic ability that they have that those aren't on the spectrum, for want of a better term, do not have. They have these credible talents in one specific area usually, but they lack the social skills. So what are they trying to keep and what they're trying to take out to create this perfect being to connect with technology? If I've explained myself right there.
Well, from what I've been able to gather from my studies and stuff like this into this, it would seem what they're trying to do is they're trying to maintain those savant level skills like you were talking about there. Savant level skills along with normal intellectual intelligence, IQ and things like that, and still keep the ability of these folks to maybe compartmentalize and do things like that, compartmentalize their interests and only express and explore those interests in a very compartmentalized way. That's something with autistic people. You'll notice a lot of them are hyper focused on one particular area of expertise or interest. And that's kind of what they're looking for because they like compartmentalized people. They love to use compartmentalization in their projects because that way the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. And it's only the person at the top who has an overall view of the entire program that knows what this is truly for. So they like to keep this type of a state of being in place. And oftentimes, people on the autism spectrum they have an affinity with technology because they do lack these social skills. So they would rather socialize online with social media or work with the computer that doesn't offer them any type of judgments or misunderstandings of what their intentions are or don't question their intentions and this kind of thing. They're more comfortable with that. So, with them being more comfortable with tech and having an affinity for it, that kind of leads into the other areas here. So, the savant skills combined with a normal or high level intelligence IQ and the compartmentalization factor, all of these things seem to be driving the positive traits that they want to keep with this. Now, they want to try to eliminate those more negative traits, things like the repetitive behaviors, things like those that are severely affected with autism, the ones that cannot function on a normal executive function day to day level. They want to try to eliminate that. And from what I had studied, it had seemed that for a long time that the rate of those who are identified on the autism spectrum, 44% thereof had average or above IQs, compared to the other percentage, which some were severely affected, and that was a much lower percentage at that point. So it seemed to me there was evidence of the engineering of these more positive traits and the elimination of the more negative traits. Now, an interesting thing just came about within the past year with the data. Now, the data is beginning to show again that people are becoming more severely affected on the autism spectrum. They have more severe limitations and have more severe of the deficits in executive function than what they had in the years that I was writing my two books on this, where I had seen these vast increases in the evidence showing that they were trying to engineer in these traits. So, what's going on? I think they're still experimenting and they don't know exactly what they're doing. So, they've been getting some negative outcomes from this and what it is it's all about data collection at this point. And it's gotten so bad that now you have RFK out there trying to do an investigation into it. And we know what causes it. If I know what causes it, you better believe they know what causes it. They're just doing this all for the public facade for all of this because they want to actually try and figure out what it is they've been doing wrong that now they're getting more of these negative outcomes with it, with whatever that's been engineered here. That's my take, that's my opinion, okay? I can't prove any of that. Just so you know, I'm just putting it out there as my own speculation on this. That's what it seems to be, in my view. They're trying to figure out what's going wrong. We were doing so well with engineering this in the direction we wanted, and now all of a sudden we're having some slide back on it. So that's my take on what they're doing, and it all has to do with transhumanism, by the way. Always has. It's a slow roll with these people. They use long-term planning with this stuff. But at any rate, I think I kind of got a little off topic. But where do you want to take it from here, Richard?
No, I we'll talk about the blockchain as well. I want to talk about, but what you're saying, it seemed to me like the human nature, or whatever you want to call it, you know what I mean, is trying to correct itself and push back in a way, and they're not capable of fighting that off. So there's something's going on. There's a clash here of them trying to re-engineer or engineer, sorry, a new type of human, and the human being in itself pushing back and trying to fix the issues that these lunatics are creating. And myself, I worked for 7 years as a youth worker for special needs children, most of which were autistic. So we have a background in this sort of stuff ourselves, understanding this. Um, and it's fascinating because the traits that they want to, what you're saying, they're traits that they want to kind of keep hold of, like the ability to reason, to communicate with people, would make it harder for them to be controlled. So it's a real balancing act because, without those traits that most of us that aren't on the autistic spectrum have, we're harder to control unless you're a MAGA fan. It's you're usually harder to control completely because you will go, I'm not doing that. That's ridiculous. Whereas obviously people with autism are very, very trusting. They're so um, engrossed in what they're doing. So to kind of try and take away of those aspects of it, you are actually allowing the person to get to decide that they don't want to do what you're asking telling them to do, or even understand that they're being manipulated, which is the big thing for me. And I see a lot of is these autistic people with autism being manipulated and used, and never has that been more apparent than Elon Musk and Greta Thunberg, both clearly autistic. I mean, it's horrific to think that these cultists would use to autistic people. They're clearly autistic. They can't. They shouldn't be. They're not, how is he most going to run companies, Elon Musk, when he's playing that computer game all the time? I've just seen him post a video about it because he's autistic and he probably can't understand what he did wrong now, like a puppy. Like he's got punched in the well, he got punched in the face, said by his son, but who believes that? And he's chucked out the door, and he probably doesn't understand what he did wrong. And as a human being, you're like, he shouldn't have been put in that position in the first place. His mum's clearly a lunatic. His dad's clearly a lunatic. He comes from a family of technocrats. He didn't really stand a chance, did he? I don't agree with a lot of the things he's absolutely done, but also if he's autistic, that's horrific too. We can see things from all angles. But how does this play into the blockchain ledger as well then? How does that play? I still find it really hard to get my head around blockchain. I do. Maybe it's something I can't kind of understand. Um, how does this ledger, they call it a ledger, selfish ledger, play into the blockchain in terms of keeping that information circulating or keeping it or monetizing it or weaponizing it? How does that work?
Well, blockchain essentially is a decentralized, distributed public digital ledger system. So, in and of itself, blockchain is a ledger system. And how blockchain works is it connects all the various nodes together in a sequential form where no information is ever lost because it is decentralized. So, the transaction is actually acknowledged on multiple different nodes. So it's much, much harder to actually ever lose information. And this is the important part of the blockchain technology. So it is a decentralized public digital ledger wherein all information and transactions are recorded and the information can't be lost. So each hash on that digital blockchain has all of the previous hashes before it encapsulated in that hash. Now, you would have to go and do an actual whole study and presentation on blockchain to really understand all the different facets of it. But essentially, what it is it's an electronic digital record keeping system that never loses any data at all. And that's the important part. They don't want to lose any data. They want all the data recorded at all times and be able to access that data at any given point on the chain itself. Because to do so gives you absolute knowledge of where an event took place or
So
where a certain bit of data came from.
can I just ask something? So
Sure.
just tell me if I'm pitching this right in my head because I'm a very like I have to visualize it to understand something sometimes. So Tower of Babel, is this blockchain building? So instead of the blocks left to right, if you picture them building upwards like a tower, twin tower, building upwards, it's literally every bit of information is building, and it never collapses on itself. Could that be seen as a Tower of Babel? Am I getting is that, or am I completely off?
Well, symbolically, yeah, you could picture it as such because it's building forward and adding more data. It's almost like an upside down Tower of Babel, if you want to go that way. So the heaviest part is going to be at the top when you get to the future because all of the previous data comes from the very beginning functions of the blockchain and everything is gathered there. So it gets larger and larger and larger as it goes, and it requires more and more energy to store the data as it goes. And at some point, if you understand some basic natural laws, you understand the law of entropy is going to kick in and it won't be able to sustain itself because it will require so much energy to maintain that it's going to collapse catastrophically on itself. And that's essentially what we're seeing being built with this blockchain technology. And of course, they've based cryptocurrency and everything else on this, but that's only to get the foot in the door with the technology. They want to put everything on a blockchain, especially your digital medical records and all of your genetic information, all of your genomic information, all of that stuff. They fully intend to put on a blockchain and tie it all together and not ever lose any of that information. So this is wherein comes the tie between this internet of bodies and this digital ledger. So you have this situation where if they're tinkering with your DNA or they're trying to record your genomic information, they'll need some type of a way to record that to an external electronic device. So they're coming up with communication networks that they could use internally in vivo in the human body actively to record information in real time. These technologies have been developed, they are being used right now, and it's all going to go in a centralized utility, and none of this data will ever be lost. That's the whole point. That's why they want to try to tie it on a blockchain. That way, they can't lose any of the records. So they want to have this external electronic record of things going on internally in your genomic form, in your DNA, in your body itself. And to have that type of a communication system between the biological body and some type of an internet utility where there's an electronic blockchain ledger to have that type of communication, it's going to be a two-way communication.
Yeah.
So essentially, they could modify externally your genetic information if they want to using these technologies. Vice versa, they could read it and they could affect it. That's the whole point. These are all dual use technologies. And this is what people need to be aware of. And this, I think, this is probably one of the most important episodes we're doing right now, Richard. And we're probably speaking over the heads of a lot of people that don't want to accept that they have these types of technologies now, and they probably have had them for 30 plus years. That's the important factor here. All of this stuff that we're actually seeing out there in the public domain now that we could look at and recognize this is going on, if that stuff is out there in the public domain now, it was going on in the special access programs 30 plus years ago. So they know what they're doing. They've developed some of this to an extent. And I think we're seeing the ramifications of it here now.
So what
So
what they're doing is that's absolutely fascinating, and that's the first time I've understood blockchain is an upside down Tower of Babylon. I get it now. That was all anyone ever had to say to me. I get that now. Just say stuff like that. I get it. So that's upside. So what's that? So that's out in the digital world. Obviously, it's digital, but it's in the physical world in terms of all these big databases, 500 billion from Donald Trump and all of these Saudi Arabian cities they're building. So this is in the physical world, the material world of databases. But at the very same time, they can now store a backup of that information of every single person that's on the blockchain ledger inside the person themselves. So
that's
you,
what it's looking like. If you really recognize that they can record information using DNA, which George Church claims to be able to do, and there's others. This is out there in the scientific literature. If they can do that, then yeah, technically they could probably store the information from every human being in the world in a single person if they wanted to, or
so
in a
so
single
above
utility.
as below. It's literally so above as below. You are having this tower that's built out there in the physical world. So if they all went down, all you would need to do is re-upload it from the human being themselves back up to the yeah.
Exactly.
It's a
So
backup.
it doesn't matter. So even though they say, well, the information will be stored to the cloud. What is the cloud? The cloud is just different nodes. It's somebody else's computer. Okay.
Mm.
If you want to get to the real physical nuts and bolts of it, it's just a computer somewhere. So what happens if all the computers catastrophically collapse and are destroyed? Then all your information's lost, right? Well, no, not if you encode it and store it in the human being. It's a backup system. It's almost like this seed arc, that seed vault they built in where is it? Is it Denmark or Norway or somewhere? Norway that they built this seed vault. It's almost like that, except they're gonna store it right out there where they could access it, probably in everybody, and that's the whole point here.
Isn't it funny though? Well, not funny, not funny, ha ha. Isn't it strange or appropriate for a death cult that we're the backup to the digital system, not the other way around?
Because of the inversion principle, right? And see, what they'll have you believe that the digital system is the backup for us. That's why they want to record all of your genomic information. Think about this. That's how they try to angle all of this. Well, if something catastrophic happens, we want to be able to maybe restore humanity somehow. So if we don't have your information, we can't do that. But if we store all of your genetic information in a centralized utility, well, if something catastrophic happens, then maybe we could rebuild that or repopulate the planet somehow with that. See, and that's how they angle it, but it's the other way around, really. It's all about
Oh,
it's the inversion principle. It's
it is.
the definition of Satanism in and of itself.
It's
So
so interesting because even if you were buried and your DNA exists, we can find DNA from a T Rex from, it's not that long ago. No, from a long time ago. Apparently, anyway, let's go with it. Apparently. So all these bodies buried in the ground. Then you have the rapture thing, and then you have the other thing where in the Jewish faith where they all come out of the tombs and go up as well. Now, all of this is reminds me of like, okay, so if all the systems went down, they wouldn't be taking the physical body out of the ground. They'd be extracting the DNA from all of the corpses in the ground and putting them back into the system. As mad as that sounds, and maybe it's a fantastic film, but if I can think of these things, they can think of these things. And to me, that's like, well, obviously they're trying to find practical ways of actually doing practical magic, of actually doing this stuff. So that's clearly to me is all of this some other stuff in the biblical text maybe is warning us about something that's happened already. Don't do it again. Probably is Tower of Babel. But that is fascinating. So we're the backup to the information, and they're telling everybody, "Go, oh, you can upload yourself to the cloud and live forever." Actually, what you're doing is you're storing the information of the Gnostic bad copy of you in the cloud to live forever. And not only that, it's relying on you and your DNA strand to keep it alive if it ever crashed. You're the backup plan.
right, it's the world of shells, as we've
Yep.
discussed before. It's a dead entity. It's the reign of dead matter, as Michael Hoffman calls it. It's form devoid of spirit. That's what they're trying to build with this, and they're going to use you as the backup for this so that they don't lose that data. Because all they could essentially engineer after the fact is something completely synthetic and devoid of life. And that's exactly what they intend to do. Thus, they want to create the system wherein they have this dual ledger system where they can store information in your DNA and simultaneously they have that data digitized and put into an electronic utility somewhere so that they could extract that or do two-way communication between those things and effectuate changes in that way. So it's the inversion principle directly implied. And they tell you, well, we want this information because we could use it for medical treatments for you. We could do very much tailor-made medical treatments for you. We can have all of this data on you so that we could predict if you're going to get sick with something and we could prevent that in the future and we could help to prevent illnesses being passed forward to your offspring. And they'll offer you all of these good medical reasons to use this technology in that way. But what they're really doing is they're using it as a Trojan horse to store the digital ledger in the DNA and have a copy of that to build their world of shells, to build their digital world, to build this new reality they want, their new world order. And it's all based in fraud and it's all based in the inversion principle. So it's something we need to be aware of and we need to really be careful moving forward with this stuff. And like I said, Richard, I think this is probably one of the more important broadcasts we're doing here because this is pointing out this stuff's happening, whether
Yeah.
people wanna accept that or not. I know it's a bridge too far for most people to think in those ways, but the technology is there. They're using it. They've made these claims about it, and like I said, if this is all public domain information now, it's been going on within the auspices of the special access programs of the military industrial complex for at least the past 30 years without our knowledge. This type of
Yeah.
stuff doesn't come to the public domain until it's been thoroughly tested and put through its paces within the militarized uses thereof. So we're seeing it now. So it's already out there. So you need to be aware.
Yeah, yeah, it's probably happening under Epstein Island, Zora Ranch as well. It's, I mean, that's fascinating. And look at Doge. What is Doge? It's about deleting waste, wasting money. They don't like waste. They don't want to lose any data. They know that people with autism don't like to feel that way. Everything needs to mean something, and you can't. You know, people that are autistic like to keep hold of something for a long time. They like
Right.
to keep it with them. Like hoarding is part of that as well. Keeping stuff. And Elon, they would have known Elon Musk would have been perfect for their job because he's slightly autistic, in my opinion, anyway. And he didn't want to see waste happening in the company. He probably genuinely didn't want to see, sorry, the country genuinely didn't want to see money wasted in the country, and probably didn't. Why are we sending it all to Israel? I have no idea. But they tap into these things and these understandings, so it's waste again. Doge was about stopping waste, and I remember he said about wasted time when it was you can only get an import output ratio wasn't sufficient enough, and it was wasted time in doing stuff. Time wasting. They do, it's quite clear now that they know that these people will build the technology for them because they have an inner built thing which they've probably put into them that they can't stand
Right.
waste or loss.
And a lot of that's cybernetics principles, the input-output ratio. Like you spoke, that is a directly cybernetics terminology.
Mhm.
So certainly we see part of this being leveraged in that way. And of course, it is the inversion principle. Even Doge itself represents the inversion principle because what's Doge spelled backwards? God,
Mhm.
electronic God. That's what it's about, and of course, it harkens to the dog star Sirius, which is an important esoteric clue to a lot of what's gone on here as well. So, that being the case, we could see what the game is all about, and sure, they've taken advantage of people, and yeah, it sounds good on the face of it. Let's eliminate wasteful spending, but what are they doing instead? Well, they're spending even more on things that we don't need. Like they're spending over $1 trillion on the military industrial complex all of a sudden. Defense spending, defense, yeah, well, defense spending.
Inversion.
I
Yeah.
love it. It is the inversion principle. So I don't know. I could go on all day long about this, but I'll shut up now.
Well, I think we should need to do a part two. I want to get this up on X, so let's try and keep it under 60 minutes. So where can people find your work and connect with you? This has been a fascinating chat.
All right. People could find me at www.alchemicaltechrevolution.com. How about you, Richard? Where could the good people find you?
All the video work, iconic.com and Substack, some may conspire. Please share this podcast and this series is incredibly important. And no one else is talking about this stuff. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. Take care. Goodbye.